Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Frank and Stan chat. And this is one of the occasional spotlight editions that we hold, where we focus in on one particular aspect, one individual, or a topic. And today I'm delighted to say that we can welcome back Professor Mel Ainscow. Hello, Mel.
Hi, nice to
Hi,
be here
Mel.
with you
Yeah.
guys.
Now, Mel has been, we're very grateful because he gives up his time. He's given up his time a few times for us, so I'm really pleased to have you back. And I have to say, Mel, one of the things that comes through all the discussions is this theme of equity. I think you got me onto this. We met many years ago, but I think it was at that stage, I wasn't quite sure what the difference between equity and equality was. So from my first meeting with you, I sort of had a better understanding of what the differences were. I know that might seem like sort of a very basic thing, but I think I was just confused as to what they all were and what it all meant. So I've known Mel for a while, and I'm glad to see him back. And the reason why we've got Mel back is there is a book that he's written called Reforming Education Systems for Inclusion and Equity. And you know, some of these books are some of them can be quite dense, but actually I picked this book up and I found it very easy to read. Now, it doesn't mean to say Mel's used, very simple words for a simple man like me to understand, because actually some of the solutions and some of the issues here are quite complicated. But actually, it's one of those books that you get into and it just flows. So well done, Mel, for making it accessible. There may be a few people here who don't know who you are. Do you want to just give us a little summary of your career and how come you've written this book and written others as well?
Uh, okay, it's a long story, so I'll give you a brief version of it, really. My background is I was born and brought up in a working class family in Manchester. Much to my own surprise and my family, I ended up being a teacher and I worked in a boys' secondary school in East Manchester. I was an art teacher and I was a very unsuccessful art teacher, I have to say. And I drifted into special education with absolutely no missionary zeal, just because there was a job going in the Moss Side district of Manchester. And that really pointed my career in the direction I've subsequently taken. And eventually I became the head teacher of a special school in the West Midlands in Walsall. And after that, I worked for a local authority as an advisor in Coventry, in fact. And then when nobody was looking, I managed to get myself into the University of Cambridge. And I spent there 10 years there in what was called the Institute of Education, working with a most brilliant group of academics who, like me, wanted to continue working in the field. And we developed all sorts of projects. And then after 10 years, I came back to the University of Manchester to be Professor of Education here. And what runs through that brief story is a continuing engagement with what you mentioned, equity. In other words, how do we develop an education system which actually treats every child as being of equal importance? During those years, I've also had a lot of international experience. I've acted as a consultant for 30 years to UNESCO, which is the main United Nations organization concerned with education. And in 2017, I worked with a group of international experts and we developed a guide. It's called a Guide for Ensuring Inclusion and Equity in Education. It's on the UNESCO website, freely available if anybody wants to have a look at it. And the group that met came up with this motto, which I think sums up what I'm about. Every learner matters and matters equally.
Mm.
So now what I do, continuing that journey, is I work with education systems, with networks of schools in this country and a lot internationally as well. I do a lot of work at the moment in Latin America. But as I often say to my colleagues, they're all part of one project. It's in my head. This is the project. How do we find ways of ensuring that every child gets a fair deal? And so this latest book, which was published in the summer, attempts to sort of summarize what feel I've learned about that, and I continue to learn, of course. The previous year, I'd written another book. I'm sorry, I'm boring everybody with all
No,
these.
no, I think
Oh no.
because we mentioned that previous book as well, because I think you're on at that
And
time.
that one was about the development of inclusive schools.
Yeah.
And one of the people who reviewed the book is the world famous expert in organizational change, Michael Fullan, Professor Michael Fullan from Toronto in Canada. And he's always been very supportive of me, for which I'm very grateful. And Michael said, why don't you write a short book which summarizes what you think you've learned about changing systems? I mean, that's his big interest anyway. And so that's what triggered it off. And I quite enjoyed writing it, really. It wasn't a long job because, as you say, it's a short book.
Yes.
I just tried to capture what I think are the key ideas. I'd summarize it in terms of what I call propositions, 6 propositions, which I say, if you want an education system to move forward in relation to this agenda of inclusion and equity, every learner matters and matters equally. These are the 6 things that you need to think about. They're not a kind of recipe. It's not a kind of cookbook approach. They're ideas that you have to think about. And of course, what I've learned about all this business of educational change is that context matters. So what happens in one place could not necessarily be replicated in another place. It is about the dynamics of particular places, the history, the culture, what makes each place unique, really. So the idea of these 6 propositions is to say to people, as you look at your context and think about where you're at, these things will provide perhaps a useful guide for your kind of discussions.
Yeah, because you talk about the social, political, and cultural factors that embrace these sorts of issues, and I'm interested to know that I think you've referenced it, that you're doing quite a lot of work at the moment in the Liverpool region, but also is that on the back of some of the work you've done for a longer period of time in Dundee, where there's that mantra again about basically everybody matters and they matter equally. I'm interested as to how much that influenced your thinking in terms of how easy it was to sort of embrace some of these changes, some of the political and structural issues that sit within the system.
Yeah. I mean, I summarized briefly, I think, in running through the book, the story of some of the key projects I've been involved with. And the 2 that you mentioned are the 2 that I'm at the moment engaged with. For the last 5 years, with colleagues from the University of Glasgow, because I'm attached to Glasgow as well as Manchester, we've worked on a project in the city of Dundee, and it's called Every Dundee Learner Matters. And we've been very fortunate, really, because of really the leadership of a wonderful director of education there, director of children's services, in fact. She's encouraged us to work with the system. And we've taken the thinking, those 6 propositions, and said, what would it look like at the level of a system? It's quite a small city, which makes it easy.
Yes.
It's about 60 schools. And but I'm not suggesting for 1 minute we've cracked it, but we've certainly made progress. And certainly the ideas that we talk about have been to a reasonable level implemented. In fact, later this morning, I'm joining another meeting. A key idea that we've used in a number of projects, and it's central in Dundee, is that we create what we usually call a strategy group. That is to say, a group of insiders, mainly school leaders, and obviously carefully chosen school leaders who we think have the capacity to take on the idea, I suppose, of what some people have called as system leaders. And what we've done is we've worked with that group of system leaders to use their knowledge and expertise of their own system in relation to these sort of ideas that are in the book, and design it to fit the particular purpose, reinforcing the point that context matters. So we've made a lot of progress there. What we've not managed to do yet is move more beyond the school gate. You see, in the book, I talk about what we called an ecology of equity. That was a phrase that my colleague Alan Dyson came up with as a result of an earlier project we did.
Because he worked with you in Manchester, didn't I? I remember meeting Alan, one of my first meetings with you in Manchester.
Yeah, a great colleague. And what we came up with, we'd worked on another project over 6 years. We tried to identify what are the barriers that making it difficult for some children and young people. And we thought, really, there are 3 things. There's what happens within schools, what happens between schools, and what happens beyond schools, beyond the school gate, as Alan would say. And when we've reflected on our Dundee work, we've made a big difference. There's no question. within schools, and the partnerships between schools are very powerful across that small city. What we've not managed to do so far is push on in relation to the wider community, families, and other services that are involved. And that's where the other project I'm working on at the moment has really kind of filled the gap.
Yeah.
With my colleagues from the University of Manchester, we are working with systems in Merseyside in a project called Cradle to Career. Now, the phrase cradle to career, and I think, again, this is explained in the book, comes from the Harlem Children's Zone in New York, which is the much quoted system-wide, area-based approach to promoting equity. So what's happened in Merseyside is that they've tried to create these kind of area-based approaches. The first one is in a small area, North Birkenhead on the Wirral. It's an area of intense economic disadvantage because of the collapse of the shipping industry and all that kind of thing. And that project's in the 5th year. We've only been involved, my colleagues and I, over the last 2 years, and I was at a meeting yesterday of it. And it's shown the potential of when you bring everybody together, the families, the social services, lots of voluntary organizations. These areas of poverty attract lots of kind of other voluntary organizations with very enthusiastic, creative people. And of course, there's 8 schools that serve that community. So we work with them. We also act as some kind of evaluators, and we try to identify successes, but also to identify what are the difficulties in trying to put this into effect. And interestingly, probably the biggest difficulty is the schools.
Yes.
Because of the pressure of national policy.
Yes. Yeah.
The scores on the doors, the competition, the multi-academy trusts. I mean, the children in this small area of North Birkenhead, there are 8 schools, including 2 secondary schools, who are in pretty good shape, I have to say.
Right.
But the kids go all over the place. They go to grammar schools, they go to faith schools, and so on. So this kind of mess that's been created by national policy, all the competition, all the emphasis on choice, really acts as a kind of barrier, really. But we made progress in all of that. So what's happening in Merseyside now is, as part of the city region development, there are 5 other areas that have taken this thinking of cradle to career, and they're putting them into place. And we're continuing working alongside those 5 areas to learn more about it. So my journey carries on, really, from place to place, time to time.
Yeah.
As I keep saying, there's only one project.
I think it's interesting.
I think your next book should be a really thick book, and every single page should say "context matters," and it should be aimed at probably the politicians who think there's an answer.
Absolutely.
A one-word answer to everything.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm interested because I know that North Birkenhead project personally, and I think there was a lot of time spent understanding and engaging with that particular community. It wasn't a case of let's bring everybody, all the schools together, and then we decide what we're going to sort of try and change. We can agree on these principles, we'll move forward. There was a lot of time, a lot of money spent talking to local residents, talking to the voluntary sector, engaging with the local authority. And that wasn't on a superficial level. This was over quite an extended period of time. Yes. So that, in effect, they were trying to change attitudes within the community. That was sort of one of the key factors, was trying to raise aspirations across everybody, because I think everybody got to a point where many of them, or some people, felt as though, well, this is, it's just another group coming in, going to tell us what they want us to do. So this sense of engagement, I think, was really important.
We're in the 6th year now of the project, and I mean that underlines another point that you're hinting at, Frank. Really, this takes time.
Yeah.
And of course, this is where the politics gets in the way, because politicians haven't got time, have they?
No.
They want a quick fix. They want a result that they can, take to the media because the election's coming up in May. And I mean, I think of all of the wonderful projects that I've not necessarily been part of, but observed, and the funding is pulled out after 3 years or whatever. And it's only 3 years later that you see the impact of that.
Well, children's centres is a good example, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because politically in those areas in Dundee and also in the Liverpool region, I know that within Liverpool there's a sense of security about the mayor's position, and so there's a sense of,
Uh-huh.
that whether it's going to be Steve Rotherham or another mayor, but there's a sense of this is going to continue, that probably politically things might not shift too
Yes.
much in the
Yeah.
area. So it does give you a sense of it having legs, really, in terms of seeing it
Yeah.
through.
Funding is another issue, of course, and
Mm.
they've been fortunate to have, good support from various groups and organizations and charities and so on. But of course, that has time associated as well, of
It
course.
does, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, can we pick up on an issue which I think I've struggled with? Is there's a lot of well, there are some schools that are, trying to develop their own sort of sense of inquiry. So and whether this is officially done, through sort of formal means or not, or this may just be an individual teacher trying something new and trying to test it out. But actually getting that sort of inquiry approach and that being shared with others, other schools, other teachers, again sort of butts up against this sort of accountability area, as if to say, well, I think we might have found something.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we don't want to do is share that,
No.
this
No.
sense of, well, because this could harm us. Others may take it forward, and it may
Yes.
be not that
Yeah.
it's the panacea, but it may be
Yeah.
the thing that sort of
Yeah.
shifts things, shifts the dial. So, how have you managed to do that in Dundee?
Well, it's an interesting. I'll come back to Dundee in a minute, but I mean, it's an interesting thing that the kind of the cocktail of collaboration and competition is an interesting one. And I think we did a study, I think 2 or 3 years ago in Manchester, where we looked at 8 area partnerships up and down the country, established area partnerships. They're in a report that you can find on the website. And what we found was there were lots of senior people in schools who were really committed to the idea of working with other schools, even though they were in real competition with them,
Yes.
And I think that's a history, I think. And because I travel around, I see what happens in other countries. We have something in England that we shouldn't underestimate. It goes back generations. I think about excellence in cities, education action zones, the leadership incentive grant, and so on and so on. There's a tradition of schools working together in this highly competitive environment. And we have a generation of senior leaders, I think, who've been brought up on that, and they know how to do it. They don't necessarily, they can't exactly tell you how they do it, but they know how to
Yeah.
do it. And I think that's a source of encouragement, and certainly something that I work with. And I mean, certainly that is central to the Dundee project. What we've done there, as I said, we have the head teacher strategy group. All the schools are in trios, sometimes called learning threes, and these are not the usual schools that they're partnership with. They
Right.
have those anyway, the local partnerships, whatever they call them. These are contrived trios made of schools across the city, which are thought to have something to offer each other, including, of course, strong schools helping schools that are in difficulties and so on. And we've really worked hard at creating those trios. And we use an approach which is, I think, described in the book,
Yeah.
called peer inquiry, where what we do is we encourage senior people in the trios of schools just occasionally to spend a morning in each other's schools, observing lessons very informally. It's not inspection, talking to teachers, talking to children, and then coming together at the end of the morning and having a discussion about what do you think we've seen and what you've learned. Now, I've had the privilege of shadowing a few of these peer inquiry groups. They're fantastic professional learning opportunities. And of course, what's happening is, as say a head teacher or a deputy head teacher watches what's going on in this other school, it's like a mirror.
Yeah.
And they're looking at their own school and they're saying, yeah, what do we do about all of that? And I just think these simple techniques, I mean, they just need an investment of time, which is easy to say, of course, are very powerful in terms of sharing ideas, but encouraging innovation and change. And as I say, I do think here in England, we have that tradition that we can build on, despite the perverse effects of some policy requirements, isn't it?
I absolutely agree with you there, Mel, because I spent some time as head of school improvement in Wakefield when they were trying to do a Wakefield-wide alliance, and there wasn't a single head teacher who was not for everybody working together.
Yeah.
Difficulty comes when you say, well, two things. One was, how can it be managed? You need a central hub to manage it. And they were certain at the time that that wasn't going to be the local authority. And therefore there was no body that would say we can manage this on your behalf. That's what
Yeah,
it needed.
yeah,
But also, as soon as you got to the level of saying, okay, well, as a community, we have a weak school here that could do with some support. Can you put your teachers, whoa, we've got SATs coming up. We can't. And that, as you said earlier on, that competition, that what will help in another school do for our school? What's the
yeah,
risk? I
yeah,
think possibly inbuilt into governors rather than the head teachers.
yeah,
I know a school where I work with quite a lot, and the head was asked to go and do some work in another school, and the governors weren't thrilled about it at all because
yeah,
even though it was a church school, the other school was in the same parish, they were the same children. There was something about, well, this could damage our school.
yeah, yeah,
I think I don't think it's head teachers. I think head teachers, school leaders are keen to do that. I don't know quite where the barrier lies, but I
yeah, yeah,
suspect governors have something to do
yeah.
with it.
Well, that's why I think we have to
Leaders.
find and not overstate them, but certainly to draw the lessons from what appear to be successful efforts and move that knowledge around. I mean, inevitably, as a Mancunian, I want to bring it back to the city. And of course, Manchester's a fascinating case.
Yeah.
The Economist, a journalist for The Economist, got in touch with me recently. He was looking at the progress of English education systems based on examination results over the last 25 years. And he'd been drawn to Manchester, and he said, "What's happened in Manchester?" And I said, "Well, I've been fortunate to be part of what's happened in Manchester in a kind of slightly peripheral way. And of course, what's happened in Manchester is the emphasis on school to school has become part of the way in which the city does its work. And interestingly, the local authority has fulfilled quite an interesting role in all that, facilitating and supporting. I think we need local authorities, but I have to learn how they now need to work in the new
Yeah,
environment.
absolutely.
And if
I
you look
agree.
at, I mean, for example, in the secondary sector in Manchester, there is a very strong secondary head teachers association, which been going on for decades, and they have their annual conference and they meet regularly. And this is the way in which, even though they're in very deep competition with each other, they support one another. The guy who chairs it, I think he still chairs it, said to me, he said the way it works is if a new head is appointed in Manchester, and it could be to an academy or to I don't know whether there are any local authority secondary schools left. And he said, what I do is I ring them up and I explain how we work together and I invite them to come to the meeting. He said, and if they don't come, I ring them up again.
It's as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah. So they've created a tradition of addressing what you've talked about, Stan, of the leadership coming from the people who are most able to do it. I suppose that's what we tried to replicate in Dundee, to get head teachers themselves to take on this role. I mean, the interesting thing in Manchester, in England and in Manchester, of course, is you've got all these sort of competing structures and the maths and all that kind of stuff. But when I see up and down the country, and those studies we did of the 8 areas, many of the people who were taking the lead in this were the chief executives of maths, who also wanted to be involved in kind of area work, because obviously area work, if it comes off, benefits everybody.
Yeah. It's interesting that when I was the CEO in Manchester, Stoke, we had schools in Stoke, Bradford, Leeds, the Wirral. But it was always Manchester were always the authority that actually wanted to sit me down in an office to talk about our engagement with other schools. Very interesting. They were interested in the academic results, don't get me wrong, but they were also keen to sort of oil the wheels to sort of try and make sure that we weren't going to go and just do our own thing, that there was this engagement. And I know I have to say I lent on Mel, I think it was about 3 years ago, to help me write a piece for Schools Week, which talked about, the sort of mechanism that might be needed to try and create these sorts of structures within areas where they currently don't exist. And I think I was really taken, Mel, with the fact that you were a sort of independent broker in some respects. That's the way I viewed it. I don't know if that is the case, but like in Dundee, I've got no axe to grind. I'm not coming from a particular place.
No.
we've just got this common purpose. I'm just interested. Has your views changed in terms of, that sort of common broker, the guy or the woman that hasn't actually got any axe to grind, just wants everything to work better?
Clearly, it helps if there's somebody like that. I think a factor in this, and I don't want to overstate my role, but I think a factor is that whatever else I am, I'm also a researcher.
Yes.
So when I'm working in Dundee or Merseyside or wherever, obviously I want to support development, but I'm trying to learn from it, and I'm collecting and engaging with evidence. I'm feeding that evidence back into the discussion in a way that's meant to stimulate action and creativity and so on. So it's a kind of, I mean, when I say I'm a researcher, I'm conscious of the fact that, people I work with in the university are real researchers, and very disciplined. I'm a bit knockabout in that respect, really. But my argument is, it's only doing this kind of messy work, getting your hands dirty, if you want to use that kind of imagery, that you can get beneath the skin of what's really happening within systems and learn from them, really. And I mean, I often quote the great guru of action research, and I'm a kind of action researcher, is Keith Lewin. And Lewin says, the best way to understand an organization is by trying to change it. And I think that's at the heart of what I'm doing. There I am in Dundee. I'm trying to support people in improving and changing the way the system works. But as we're doing that, I'm hoping they're learning, but certainly I'm taking these ideas away and, of course, writing these
degrees. Thank you very much. I mean, sorry, Stan, you were going to say?
I was going to ask a question to take us on to just a different route, I think. Currently, the heads I meet on a regular basis feel absolutely thrown by what they perceive as a change in the complexity of children with special needs coming into school, and trying to be inclusive, and yet knowing that there's a threat to the school from outside, but also there's a case in some schools where these young people are so complex with their difficulties that they can't actually include them quite as much as they would want to. In fact, I think there's a case of quite a number of schools now having separate units for children with difficulties, let's say, and they feel as though some feel as though that's inclusive because they're getting the curriculum. Others say, well, no, because they're not included with everything that's going on in the school. And I don't know what the solution is. I just wondered if you found a way of looking at it.
I think we could do with another meeting. I mean, this is, as far as England is concerned, this is one of the biggest challenges. And I mean, not to mince words, it's a mess. And it's a mess that's been developing for about 30 years. And, how to change it, and I get into it a bit in the book, or all of this, it requires reform. It requires, a really fundamental rethink. But of course, that's no use to today's parent who want the best for their child.
Yeah.
And the mess we're in creates real pressures and dilemmas for parents. But we are in a mess, and we're moving to an even more segregated system. People in those units, I'm sure many of them doing very wonderful work, but ultimately the children are segregated. There's no doubt, to varying degrees, of course. Then we're talking of opening more special schools. I mean, getting to the point where there'll be more people in special provision than in the regular system. Now, in the book, I make some reference to other countries, and the one that I obviously most reference is Portugal, which is probably the most inclusive education system in the world. And obviously, context matters. So it doesn't mean what Portugal do, England can do. But I mean, it's an inspirational place because 20 odd years ago, they closed all of their special provision and they moved it into the mainstream, and all children go to the local school. And available to the local school is all the expertise that used to be in special education, the special teachers, the speech therapists, the educational psychologists. Critically, and linked to something we said earlier, all the schools in Portugal work in clusters. So they're in area clusters. And so the special provision serves the cluster. And of course, the cluster includes the possibility of schools supporting each other. Another interesting dimension in Portugal is that head teachers, they're called directors, are elected, and the local community is involved in that election process.
Oh, wow.
And they're elected for 4 years. And then if they do well, they might be elected for another 4 years, and then they're finished. When I've been working in Portugal for 30 years, and when I first heard of this, I thought this is ridiculous. But actually, it works really well because it connects the community to the school, a sense of shared responsibility. But the other interesting thing about Portugal, I worked for the OECD a couple of years back, and we did a review of the national policy there. And the other interesting thing, there's a kind of motto that everybody seems to know about. And certainly I heard the minister say it, and it's a motto that would be very useful to England. Simply put, it's this: you do not have to label to intervene. That's their argument. So, of course, you can't eliminate labeling altogether. We all do it in normal conversation. But you're sensitive to the idea that labeling, which is well-intentioned to bring additional help and resources, brings all these potential disadvantages. So their kind of motto, their driving principle, you don't have to categorize. Now, England, I think, is the world leader in labeling. Every time I go in schools, I hear a new label that's being introduced, And I mean, it's an epidemic here, really. But that is an enormous barrier. And how the hell you shift that? That'll be my next book, I think.
Well, that's timely, because that's the 30 minutes for Spotlight. So if you get round to that new book, we'd be more than happy to spend 30 minutes chatting to you about it, Mel.
Okay,
thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time again this morning. And yeah, for those of you who follow us, we're back soon for another weekly edition of the Frank and Stan Chat. So thank you, Mel. Thank you, Stan. And thank you for watching or listening. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.